So now I'm basically paying $8 a month for the streaming service equivalent of a coin flip when it comes to the quality of programming on said streaming service. This will be fun. I'm going to be doing maybe a couple of these DC Universe streaming service reviews and video logs talking about some of the original material they're putting onto that particular site, so long as I stay subscribed to the service. I might drop my subscription at a certain point if I'm not getting much enjoyment or material to work with. Let's talk about the series I binged yesterday after work. The very conflicted and back and forth quality of the first season of Titans. This is, of course, the premiere original series DC Universe dropped on the site. First thing, along with all the comics and movies that were released before, that takes kind of a darker, grittier edge to characters such as Robin, Beast Boy, Starfire, and Raven, and is probably best known for having the infamous "fuck Batman." Yeah. I watched the whole first season when I got home yesterday. I'd seen the pilot before. I had mixed feelings about the pilot, certainly, but as I've always said before, I try not to judge an entire series based on the pilot alone. It gives you an idea of what the setup and the premise is going to be, certainly, but doesn't say anything with regards to character development, story arcs that are allowed to kind of flourish or are dropped, and the general direction that the series takes overall. There's some good stuff. I'll admit that. There is some good stuff here. And there's some stuff I'm curious about with regards to motivation behind the showrunners taking certain actions with characterization, with style. Usually I start with pros. Let me first talk about some of the major drawbacks I had watching the first season in its entirety. The color scheme and color palette that they decide to go with for the show. They, more than ever, take the Snyderish desaturation or gloominess of those particular Zack Snyder DC films, and they amplify it to a point that it was kind of a frustrating watch when something a little bit more, let's say, bombastic or exciting was happening on screen. I want to say a good 85 to 90% of the season had that washed out, cool blue tones, leans very into not having vibrant colors aside from, say, when a power's activated, such as Starfire activating her light powers, or a little bit of Beast Boy's transformations into his green skin phase, or the only animal he really transforms to in this season is a green tiger. Those were the rare occasions that some sort of color really shone through other than cool blues or really cool tones. That was a little conflicting for me just because with something especially like a comic book based property, I appreciate having some more variety in my color scheme there. Even in a more, let's say, melancholy film like Infinity War, you still had an abundance of literally colorful characters all across the board in all different types of colorful settings. Here, where a majority of the narrative takes place in either Chicago, Detroit, DC, Ohio, where it's all taking place in this Midwest area in the bleak of winter. That's not the most exciting locale or exciting visual canvas to work with, but I was able to stay engaged through the season despite that, even though that was something that was always constantly drawing its attention to my eye. The other thing too is an issue with lighting. They are very fond of having a lot of their action sequences take place in darkly lit areas. I get it though, on some regard, these characters are trying to stay off the grid. They're not going to be having big vibrant fights out in the public. They're gonna be in dark alleyways or in warehouses or in really bleak looking little hotel rooms to have their little one-on-one combat. You know, I mentioned it in my worst of list this year when it came to the movie Beasts of Burden. Even though I get what you're going for with a more closer to natural lighting scheme, you can still pop it up a little bit with some well-placed lighting. There's a whole sequence where Starfire is in a fight with cops in this house in the dead of night, and save for one window that someone will occasionally blur past in a frenzy of action, you don't really know what's going on. The locations of characters and places in relation to one another. Add to that the editing on action sequences quite a few times is that very frantic paced, cut, the Taken 3 school of editing action. You mix that with the lighting and it's not the most appealing thing. And the third major thing I kind of took umbrage with this season was its very inconsistent balancing act between trying to be a legitimately compelling, gritty drama, but to the point where it goes into excess on grit and violence and disturbing content, where it almost became comical. I wanted to talk about some of the things that really drew me in, because there were glimmers of potential here and that I could see this series building off of. Because believe it or not, I didn't go into this viewing wanting to just purely hate on it. I wasn't one of those people who, when I first saw the trailer for this, I was kind of like, oh, this is gonna be the worst thing ever since pick a DC property. No, it was more about like, this could have been either enjoyably bad for me, or, you know what, I'll find some things of merit here in the show, even though I don't overall have a glowing recommendation for the product, and that's kind of what played out. So some glimmers of potential that I hope are nurtured in future installments should this series continue. There are good character moments. Despite all the grittiness and all the misconstrued kind of attempts to purposefully lean into being super dark, serious, there are good character moments that exemplify these heroes struggling with problems. I buy this guy playing Dick Grayson as being damaged goods. That is essentially where the character is being picked up on. He has left Batman behind. Every time he puts on the Robin costume, he gets into craze kill mode without killing anyone necessarily, but royally messing them up, scraping their face against broken glass messed up. I get why the character is at that particular spot, why we would want to pick up with this character, why his emotional character arc with Rachel, with Raven, the runaway teen, is kind of the linchpin and seems to be what they're going to be building this entire series around. As much as this is a show about the Titans, about this team, this group of characters, it's more so about the dynamic between Dick Grayson and Rachel, you know, how he takes more of a fatherly or brotherly role towards her. Overall, the acting is pretty solid. At no point was anyone truly standing out as a horrible actor or being too camp or too wooden. I sincerely did like the interactions between characters when it was a bit quieter, when I kind of forgot that this was a show about the Titans. I kind of wish the show took some more risks with regards to allowing characters to naturally develop these rhythms and rapport with each other a little bit more so than being like, well, Dick Grayson and Corey Anders, we know they hook up or they get involved in each other's lives because that's the way Robin or Nightwing and Starfire are in the comics. So at some point in this season, we're gonna have them hook up. And that moment comes pretty quick and with very little build up to that moment. Even though I think what they're playing for is these are two damaged people and this is just something that they do to forget that they're damaged momentarily. It still came off as kind of the more pandering side of things when it came to storytelling with, you know, characters with a pre-established mythos. I'm not saying there isn't potential for that relationship to develop and grow further, because the actors do have good chemistry together, but it really felt rushed. And overall, that feeds into the tone of this series as well, or at least this season is, it feels like it really wants to get to certain points quickly, but then when it comes to the actual stuff that I gravitate towards, such as strong characterization, it provides opportunities, but doesn't focus more on that. It doesn't grow or expand beyond those little glimmers of opportunity. Case in point, there's a whole episode dedicated to the Doom Patrol. It introduces Beast Boy as a regular cast member, but he's already established with the Doom Patrol, and he and Raven kind of take a tour of the Chief's little sanctuary for wayward souls and people who have had a rough go of things. And there was a lot more heart and character, I felt, injected into that one episode with characters we only see once than there was in the overall series. Actually, my favorite episodes out of this first season were the episodes that weren't focusing on the main narrative. The Dick Grayson, Jason Todd episode was kind of a half and half. I wasn't too drawn in by the promo stuff introducing the guy playing Jason Todd, but then I kind of remembered Jason Todd's supposed to sort of be very off-putting in comparison to Dick Grayson, but given that Dick Grayson in this version of the mythos is borderline psychotic at times, I was kind of curious to see what they do with Jason. And he plays that very brazen, very arrogant, loose cannon type of Robin. When we have another Robin who's just as loose cannon as he is, it sometimes got lost in the mix. Where does Dick get off, kind of preaching the gospel of the bat to this kid? The actor did a good job with it. I understand Jason Todd is supposed to have that standoffish characterization to him. His work with Dick, when they're actually just kind of trying to be friends, but you can tell there's this very tense thing between them, i.e. him being the new Robin and essentially replacing Dick, it worked for what it was. It could have been more, and who's to say it won't be more in further seasons, but for a starting point, it was okay. My actual favorite episode of the whole season was the Hawk and Dove centric episode, where it takes you back into the origins of Hawk and Dove, who are only in 2 or 3 episodes. And that whole episode wasn't so much about, okay, here's the origin of Hawk and Dove, and they go around beating up pedophiles. This is about grief and loss. These two people dealing with trauma and eventually kind of finding support in one another, even if it isn't the most healthy of support networks. And that was by far a more fascinating bit of character work for me than, again, Demon Girl Rachel summoning her dad Trigon. Spoilers. Certainly the episodes where they allow a moment to establish more character, those were, I feel, needed for me, because if it just stuck to the main narrative, I don't know if I would have had the patience to get through it. The season finale, which from the get-go, everything is not as it seems, in which Dick Grayson is forced to hunt down Batman, who you never see head on, and you never actually hear his voice too clearly. I will give him credit for a show on, for a television show budget. They do a good job of circumventing having to show Batman head on. You're not denied seeing some bad action. In this episode, he takes down a SWAT team in the Batcave, essentially. And even though it is sometimes a choppy action and stuff, there are points where it does look dynamic, pun intended. There's this whole scenario where you already kind of know, this is way off kilter. We don't know enough about this universe's Batman, let alone this universe's Dick Grayson, to have this proper emotional build up to this confrontation. So from frame 1, you automatically kind of know something is amiss. And I believe that was the intent. The showrunners kind of knew that we're really not offering you this as the end-all be-all confrontation that you were expecting, that there's something a little bit more going on with it, and yeah, it's what I expected it to be, which leaves the season on a cliffhanger. I will say I am curious to see where they could possibly go from here. They set up interesting elements. I know Doom Patrol is getting their own spin-off series. I hope they go with a different tone for that particular show, something maybe a little bit lighter. There's a post-credits tease for the last episode that sets up a fan favorite character. Wonder Girl shows up in a couple of episodes, and I did kind of like this contemporary appearance of the character a bit. She's been retired and is sort of disillusioned with superhero work, but still wants to do good and teams up with Dick. There's potential here. Is it worth getting the trial subscription, or worth, subscribing to DC Universe? Ultimately, like I said, that's going to be up to what you're looking for. If you can kind of let go of your DC canon, if you're able to disassociate and divide this interpretation from that and just see it as this is an opportunity to see some fascinating character work, sure. The overall narrative still needs to win me over. We'll see what's in store for the next season. For right now, I guess I will hang on unless all the other originals or the other show I'm about to talk about take a sudden dip in quality, and I'll be like, it's not worth hanging around for just to see how Titans turns out. So we'll see. I'll be back in just a little bit talking about the actual show that forced my hand in starting my subscription. So see you there.